All right, it is time now for our Alaska news for this Tuesday morning. It is, of course, the 22nd of November, 2016, getting pretty darn close to Thanksgiving, if I do say so myself. I'm Steve Floyd. I'll be your host here for the next half an hour or so of Alaska news, and then I'll take a little break and come back for some comment. Normally focused on something that's in the news. I'll let you know what that is by the time we reach the end of our newscast today. All right, let's get going. You may have heard there was a tsunami, at least a warning thereof, after an earthquake in Japan today. A preliminary magnitude of 7.3. It was later downgraded to a 6.8. Guess where? That's right, Fukushima. And they were saying that there was a tsunami warning for up to a meter, 3 feet or so, possibly as high as 3 meters or around 10 feet. That was later rescinded, and it looks like there was no tsunami. However, there was a bit of a aftershock, so to speak, in the negotiations that Governor Walker is undergoing right now in Japan for the possibility of Japanese purchase of Alaska LNG. We'll be watching that story for Wednesday. A light earthquake was felt throughout the Kenai Peninsula in the Anchorage area as well, but there were no immediate reports of damage. Alaska Earthquake Information Center says the magnitude 4.0 hit just before 1:30 Monday afternoon. It was centered about 30 miles southwest of Anchorage, and it had a depth of about 24 miles. A 46-year-old Ekwok man was sentenced to 10 years in prison on Monday for assaulting his mother at her home in that southwest Alaska village back in 2014. Michael Kawagilia's mother told troopers that her son used a broken chair leg to beat her and also used a bread knife to cut her arm. She said her son had consumed a large amount of alcohol prior to the assault. There's the details emerging on the loss prevention officer at Fred Meyer in Anchorage who was stabbed just before 5:30 Sunday evening. Anchorage police had responded to a call after this stabbing. 31-year-old Stephen Treadway was the person who was observed by the loss prevention officers concealing merchandise in his backpack and attempting to leave the store without paying. When confronted, he stabbed the LP officer in the neck. He later been charged with robbery and assault and was remanded to the Anchorage jail. In North Dakota, police fired tear gas and water at hundreds of protesters yesterday in the freezing North Dakota weather that happened both Sunday night and Monday. As the standoff there continues, it looks like it is now escalating. Back in Anchorage, many gun owners here appreciate the laid-back rules when it comes to buying and selling guns. A handshake, trade of goods, maybe even cash, it all might be used, and all that's involved in the parties in buying or selling a gun. However, that is problematic for people who are trying to ensure that such a gun bought or sold in Alaska is not connected to a crime. And KTUU TV is encouraging people to report the serial number of any gun that they purchase. Marijuana money is already reaching state coffers, but the industry is not yet self-funding. It looks like the state of Alaska is going to be taking its first marijuana taxes. Records from the Alaska Alcohol and Marijuana Control Office show that the nascent industry has already paid more than $750,000 in fees since the first license requests came out in 2015. Once again, not yet making enough money to be afloat, but certainly paying taxes. A Wasilla man died Sunday morning in the rollover crash of his sport utility vehicle. Troopers are still investigating the crash that killed 28-year-old Corey Johnson. It looks like when the troopers responded, they saw that he had been northbound on Lucille Street when his Chevrolet Trailblazer left the roadway and rolled into trees. He was declared dead at the scene. An environmentalist group is suing the Federal Railroad Administration for failing to disclose the approval process for the Alaska Railroad's application for rail shipments of highly volatile liquefied natural gas. The Alaska Railroad would make the nation's first rail shipments of LNG. The Center for Biological Diversity filed that lawsuit in U.S. District Court in Washington, D.C. on Monday. The Miyoko Shakashita, the senior attorney for the organization, says in a news release that the federal agency has largely ignored a February public records request seeking records and information about the hazards of carrying LNG. So once again, they are suing over a lack of information on that Alaska Railroad LNG project. Members of the public gathered in Palmer on Sunday in an effort to locate 16-year-old David Benjamin Grunwald, last seen or heard from on November 13th. Turns out that Brenda Paradise is a retired colonel and a private investigator for guard search and investigations, and they apparently sent out that notice that let people know where that search was taking place. And they did so apparently mistakenly. They went out to the public, and instead of having just a dozen or so people show up, they had literally hundreds of people showing up at First Baptist Church on Helen Street on Sunday at 11 a.m. Once again, anyone who may have information about the boy, remember his vehicle was found burned out, no body, no sign of the boy. Anyone with information, please call the Alaska State Troopers or Crime Stoppers or Paradise herself at 281-342-7299. The State Department is advising U.S. citizens that happen to be traveling in Europe to be aware of a, quote, heightened risk of terrorist attacks over the holiday season. The advisory issued on Monday says that credible information indicates that the Islamic State and al-Qaeda militants continue to plan attacks in Europe around the holiday season. The statement also warns that extremist sympathizers or self-radicalized extremists may try to execute such attacks. The department is encouraging travelers to be cautious at holiday festivals and outdoor markets, and they're urging Americans to avoid large crowds and be vigilant when visiting tourist sites, riding public transportation, and meeting in places of worship, hotels, restaurants, and other gathering spots. The advisory praises European efforts to disrupt plots, but says the U.S. remains concerned about the potential for attacks. When Shane Cox began selling his homemade firearms and silencers out of his military surplus store in Kansas, he stamped "Made in Kansas" on them to assure buyers that the Kansas law would prevent federal prosecution of anyone owning firearms made, sold, and kept in the state. The 45-year-old resident of Chanute also handed out copies to customers of the Second Amendment Protection Act that was passed in 2013 by the Kansas legislature and signed by the governor of Kansas at the time. Even collected sales taxes. His biggest selling item was unregistered gun silencers that were flying out of the shop as fast as Cox could make them. And now prosecutors are charging him with violating federal law, despite the state law that supposedly protects him from just such an incident. The Division of Elections is hoping to have the most recent election certified by November 30th, counting more ballots this Wednesday from the November 8th general election. This will be the 15th and final day of counting. Ballots mailed from overseas addresses and other ballots from regional office must yet be removed. They have to have been reviewed, opened, and counted by the 23rd. According to the director, Josie Bonke, said the 12-member bipartisan state review board met for the first time this week to start auditing election results to ensure their accuracy. Once again, they hope to have the election certified by November 30th. North Slope Government and History is now part of high school graduation requirements for all North Slope Borough schools. The Borough School Board passed a new policy this month, making the curriculum change mandatory for students, effectively beginning with freshmen who start next year in 2017. The Inupiaq Education Director for the North Slope Borough School District said the change has been years in the making, going back to the formation of the North Slope Borough School District, when founding Mayor Eben Hobson in his speech said that the schools will reflect the ideologies of the Inupiat. The schools will reflect, quote, who we are as people. So once again, now the North Slope schools have been expanded in their curriculum to reflect the ideologies of the Inupiat. Anchorage firefighters are cautioning residents not to neglect their chimneys this winter. This after a series of residential fires in recent weeks, the latest of 19 fires linked to chimneys in the city so far this year. Anchorage Fire Department spokesman John C. said that chimney fires, which occur when heat or embers ignite a buildup of creosote, trapping the flames inside the flue, can damage a chimney's lining. Witnessing such a fire, he said, is quite an experience. It's not like you've borrowed a 737 and strapped it onto your chimney. The sound level is quite incredible. You run outside and you see flames about 10 feet up from your stovetop. It's like a blowtorch. Now, according to the U.S. Fire Administration, home heating was the second leading cause of fires between the years 2010 and 2012, including an average 45,200 fires a year, an annual average of 155 deaths, 625 injuries, and $351 million in property losses. About 84% of those fires were confined to chimneys, flues, or fuel burners. The most recent chimney fire in Anchorage, extinguished by responders, was called in by a resident shortly after 8:30 in the evening on October 29th. The occupant had a fire in the fireplace and was concerned that the fire had gone up to the attic. And they called when they found something that wasn't right and evacuated as soon as the fire department arrived. The fire did actually char overhead areas but did not destroy the home's roof. It was quickly put out by crews from the Fire Station 14 after they cut into the ceiling to gain better access. Once again, don't take for granted that your chimney is protected. Take good care of your chimney and make sure that it has been cleaned recently. A nonprofit regional development group is recommending that the Alaska Marine Highway System be managed as a corporation under state ownership. Robert Venables of the Southeast Conference told the Ketchikan Daily News that the group wants to get input from lawmakers and the public in 2017 while spending the year drafting legislation and an operating plan. The Department of Transportation's ferry system has a fleet that's getting older as funding and ridership decrease. Venables said that the Alaska-owned corporation model would still require a state subsidy, but the system would have a board that could pursue other partnerships and revenue. And the Marine Transportation Advisory Board will discuss the group's progress on Monday. Turning now to Anchorage, we see new details about sex offenses in Alaska, showing the common attributes of many cases. The Alaska Department of Public Safety released a supplementary report detailing information about felony-level sex offenses in the state in 2015. You can find that full report at dps.alaska.gov. Most commonly, victims are 15-year-old girls and suspects are 22-year-old men. Also, suspects are usually acquaintances who attack at a home. The adolescents and teenagers most likely to be victims. Last year, there were 13,052 felony-level sex offenses reported in Alaska, with 659 of those taking place in the Anchorage Bowl. Western Alaska saw the second most offenses with 274. All right, we're going to take a short break, and I'll come back with more Alaska News in just a moment.